Welcome to the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, Culture Editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. We have a special episode today. If you're watching on YouTube, you can probably see that. We have 4 squares, kind of Brady Bunch style going on right now because I'm joined by my colleague, editor at The Federalist, Madeline Osburn, and Ellie Bufkin of Townhall.com. Ellie, what's your title at Townhall? Staff writer at townhall.com. We are extremely excited to be joined by our special guest, Lionel Shriver, acclaimed author of the new book, fantastic, important book, Motion of the Body Through Space. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Lionel.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, we'll dive right in. I want to start with my question, which is sort of it may be the obvious one when it comes to this book, but a huge part of it is sort of you have the boomer generation clashing and grappling with and kind of trying to acclimate to the new ideology of wokeness, which I think is very interestingly compared by the protagonist in this book to religion. It was fascinating. What made you want to explore the tension, at least the generational tension in the book?
Well, of course, in nonfiction, I've been involved in the tension with identity politics for some years now. And I don't like to keep a sharp divide between what I write about in nonfiction and fiction. It doesn't make any sense to do so. What I'm interested in, I'm interested in. So it's inevitable to me that the things that I take on in my column for The Spectator in the UK, I would naturally also take on in fiction. Although I think that in fiction, the involvement is much more fun. You know, it's meant to be playful. There's a backstory in the book, which has got me into trouble in some of the reviews. But if you have my sense of humor, it's one of the best parts of the book. Fortunately, everyone doesn't share my sense of humor.
So I think anybody who's mentioning that backstory in the reviews is kind of making the point of the backstory, that we've kind of narrowed the boundaries of acceptable discourse to an impossible level of restriction. So did you expect that? I'm sure you probably at this point do expect that to come up in the reviews.
Yeah. In fact, it was pointed out to me that I invited it. And there's a way in which, honestly, I think that if I published the book without any element that was a little controversial, that my readership might have been disappointed. It's like, what's wrong with her, you know? And I mean, it wasn't all that calculated, but it was a way of entertaining myself, and I think it's pertinent to the book. And because a lot of people listening have not read it, I think we should explain what it is. That it's an employment tribunal. I have one of my 2 main characters is the deputy head of the Albany Department of Transportation. And he would have expected to become the head at around 60, but instead the department hired a woman less than half his age with absolutely no background in transportation or urban planning or anything of the sort. She has an undergraduate degree in gender studies from Columbia. But the department wanted to improve its diversity stats, and she's a second-generation Nigerian. So, and they actually, when they hired her, they thought she was Muslim because they didn't know anything about Nigeria.
Right.
Just half Christian, right? So when they find out at a midpoint in this tribunal she's not Muslim, they're crushed. But she, that character is a little bit of a construct, I freely admit, but part of the point is that her parents are rich, and she is also, they're in oil in Nigeria, and she's also, she's not really an immigrant, she's an American, she was born here, so has all the rights, she's not undocumented or anything, and she is not the descendant of slaves. In fact, given the history, she may well be descended from slave traders. So she's as culpable as anyone if we believe in heritable guilt. And yet she has been benefiting from affirmative action. And the truth is, this is a fairly commonplace phenomenon. It's not just a little perversity of mine that I contrived this character who kind of slips through and benefits from policies that are really meant for the descendants of American slaves. Something like half of Harvard's Black intake is African, and not the descendants of slaves, and often very well off. So I was going for a demographic that is real. And I'm also looking at the experience, which I was interested Glenn Lowry in one of his podcasts pointed out must be rife, that junior employees who've been passed over and have superiors who are not especially well qualified or are incompetent. This particular character is incompetent, but they have been hired because of the group to which they belong, and it makes the organization look good. And that creates a lot of resentment that is, in the current political circumstances, absolutely inexpressible. So nobody can say anything. And the tribunal is all about this character, my white male, 64-year-old character, having finally lost his temper for literally 2 seconds. And that was enough. And they're out for his scalp. He dared to slam his hand on this woman's desk. And this is being interpreted as an act of racism and sexism and anti-immigrant feeling and xenophobia, and you got it. So, the people on the who are sitting in judgment on him are a couple of them are young and very woke, and then there's a third one who's a middle-aged Black guy who just wants it all to go away. So he just thinks it's stupid, and he's the only one in the tribunal who has a sense of humor. And I got this idea of just putting a transcript in the middle of the book,
which is so good, and it speaks for itself. I mean, the transcript is
absolutely no authorial commentary. And I got this idea from this case in Canada, when there was a young female academic who was raked over the coals for showing her class a Jordan Peterson video.
Right.
Which was, some kind of terrible abuse statute. And she had the wit to bring her iPhone and covertly record the academics just destroying her, and also self-parodying themselves along the way. I mean, the way these people talk, I could not make that stuff up. It's so loaded with jargon. It's so arcane and painful. So that recording went viral on the internet. And I thought, I liked that device, and I liked the way that, in this case, it got me around a point of view problem, because the rest of the book is told from the perspective of his wife. So I can get this in without her having actually been there, and while still not violating my point of view rules. So, but because white writers are never, ever now, even if they allow themselves to have Black characters, you're never supposed to have a Black villain. They have to be exemplary, wise and, kindly, and, they're always the best people. Think Morgan Freeman. So, and I don't like rules. I mean, that's why I became a fiction writer in the first place. I like controlling my own little world, and I don't like being told what to do. And in the olden days, that's exactly the kind of person that was attracted to this profession.
Yes, that does seem to have changed. Does Madeline or Ellie, do either of you guys want to jump in here?
No, I mean, I just want to say, I think that, you know, one of the things that's so amazing about your work, and not just your most recent work, but, you know, the books, like I got into your writing with the Mandibles. And I think like it speaks so much to really what's going on today. It almost seems like you had that crystal ball back then when you wrote.
I know, it's become frightening, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, I keep thinking of the Mandibles. But your writing then and your most recent work now, I mean, I think it's speaking to just a complete lack of fear of the cultural monster that is kind of like overtaking all of us right now. We're all so afraid of what we're going to be called, what we're going to be told. And I love reading your work, because this is kind of like the fantasy about what it would be like if we really weren't
if we were allowed to write books.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I agree. It's funny, in interviews, it's happening to me all the time now. People ask me, why haven't you been canceled? I mean, I don't want to tempt fate, but everyone's like, what are you doing either right or wrong that they've left you alone? Now, to be perfectly accurate, they haven't left me alone.
Right.
And there have been a couple of incidents now where if my publisher or the magazine for which I write didn't have my back, I'd be out on my ass. But because the institutions have stood by me, that's why I'm still here. And I think that speaks to what's gone wrong, because the problem isn't just that individuals are being attacked. It's that the institutions behind them are not being supportive and are caving as soon as there's a Twitter storm. And that's where the rot is, more than, you know, sticks and stones, right? I mean, Twitter can say all they want. The problem is caring about what Twitter says.
Right. Madeline.
Like you said, this is really commonplace, the like choosing diversity over qualifications. I was just curious, have you had any readers reach out to you saying like, yes, this has happened to me?
Not yet, partly because, well, I guess for a couple of reasons. First off, because this book was released during lockdown, I haven't had any real interchange with audiences. I would usually have done dozens of events on this book by now, and then I would have had a lot of interchange with my audience. And that's one of the deprivations of this era and the frustrations of releasing a book in this environment. Because I value that, and I really like hearing from readers and their experience. So the answer is no, but I know they're out there. And my biggest frustration with the whole affirmative action thing is that I think it's especially destructive for the people whom it is designed to help. You know, if I would not want to believe that my books were published because of my skin color or my sex or because of my sexual proclivities, especially considering how plain vanilla they are. That's undermining, right? It makes you doubt yourself, and I think there are talented people who might otherwise have got the job or been published or, you know, achieved everything that they achieved anyway, who have had their confidence undermined because there's that little doubt, you know, is why did I make it? And I think that's terribly unfair. And it also perpetuates prejudice rampantly because everyone else thinks, well, why were you so successful? Nobody ever says anything, but there's just this little which is so creepy. I think it's terrible. And I want, you know, I know it's old fashioned and meritocracy is it's supposed to be all rigged but you know, what's the alternative? I want people to have an even crack at opportunity, and then all bets are off. You know, the gun starts the race, and may the best man or woman or something in between win.
Well, that is a very apt analogy for this book in particular, which focuses really heavily on one of the characters' attempts to complete what is called in the book a metal man race at, I think he's 64, as you said. Something so interesting is there's this tension between the rugged individualism that the community he finds of competitors insists upon, and you bring this up often in the book, that this is about nothing other than believing in yourself and finishing. But there's also something very important about the fact that he finds community there, and you very clearly draw a comparison between this community and the campaign that they undertake to complete these races and to test their bodies to the very limits, and religion. It's something that's always been interesting for me, because I've always had a hard time comparing things that are not explicitly religions to religion. But you kind of answered the question that had always bothered me about this, which is there is no eternity in those comparisons usually. Like, religion offers typically an afterlife, and these other things don't. And so in that way, they're fundamentally different. But you talk about how for them, there's this notion, for these athletes, these competitors, there's this notion of invincibility, of never dying, of being you can't die. You're so fit, you're in peak physical form that you're just completely invincible. And I wanted to ask you how important that element of it was to this formulation as you were writing the book.
Well, the setup is that it's about a married couple who have entered their 60s, and the man who's a little bit older suddenly discovers fitness, and first he wants to run a marathon, and then he wants to run a triathlon, and really grueling kind, a la Iron. And meanwhile, he's never done anything of the sort. He's been quite sedentary his whole life, and his wife has been a fitness freak for her whole life. But importantly, she's been a fitness freak in a very private capacity. She's not a joiner. In fact, she detests joining. She's not a member of anything. Her husband observes she's never even joined a private library. So, and so she runs and bikes and stuff, but it's all about her relationship to herself. And Remington's involvement is very social, and I think these days a lot of people's involvement in fitness is very social, which is personally foreign to me. And I think you can already tell which of these characters I identify with.
Very much so.
And so that what's repulsive to her is not only his timing, because he chooses to get involved in fitness at the very point that her knees are completely shot. She's, after running for her entire life, she's had to quit. Her exertions are severely curtailed, partly because she has been so fanatical for her whole life. Believe me, I am now finding out for myself just how much you can wear your body out. But so it strikes her, the timing seems like a betrayal. But she's also disgusted by the fact that he has made his involvement in fitness other people's business. And so I think this compulsion to become part of a community, a group which is driven toward a common purpose, is completely foreign to my experience of fitness. Or actually, it's completely foreign to me, full stop. I grew up in a religious family, and I am not religious, and I am instinctively suspicious of the urge to join groups, to lose yourself in them, and to allow their purposes to dictate your own purposes. And there is a connection, of course, between the joinery involved in, say, a triathlon and the identity politics movement, which John McWhorter has often compared to a religion. In fact, I gather he's writing a book all about the fact that that identity politics has become, in fact, anti-racism in particular has become a religion. And I can see how you might be uncomfortable with always trotting out that parallel, but I think with the fitness thing in particular, there is some real commonality. The attraction of fitness these days is not just being more comely, but it seems to promise relief from disease and relief from aging, and therefore, if you take it to its natural endpoint, eternal life.
Right.
And as my main character observed, it's the oldest shtick in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So,
and relief from earthly burdens, pain, and you know, all of that.
It's also a kind of Übermenschen, Nietzschean project, the kind of ultimate refinement of the self. Now, of course, as I reject that as on the face as real refinement of the self. I mean, it's only a refinement of the body. And I think there's a difference. And that's one of the things that the book is exploring. But certainly the fitness industry is offering this idea of the final perfection. And it's interesting, it's because it's a perfection that you approach like any mathematical limit, so that you never quite get there. And therefore, there's always more to do. That's one of the attractions, is that it offers you this essentially infinite occupation, you know, a way to spend your time, and you're reassured that as long as you're expending calories, then it's productive, that you're virtuous, that this is a good way to spend your time. Of course, the author questions this.
I think that the fitness element is just so fascinating, and I spent a lot of time living in New York and kind of in seeing the fitness culture there, and like seeing like the Soul Cycle culture. Those people, I mean, they charge $32 a class to ride a bike for 30 minutes. When you burn maybe 180 calories, or somebody did the math on that once, it's ridiculously low. You know, you can walk to the subway and you'll burn more calories. But it's really, really interesting. And I think you really touch on it so well, this tendency towards hoisting something like that as a religion and creating that in your life. And I don't know if that's maybe like because something like that is missing from your life, like that you would want to do that. But I mean, it's crazy to me. Like the sign up sheets, you know, for those classes are like hundreds of people who can't get in, you know, because they all want to be there so badly. And so that they can prove to other people that they're doing it. I mean, because clearly it's not just a personal thing at that point, you know, it has to be a group cultural thing. So I don't know. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, this is all about the glorification of the body.
Mm-hmm.
I've written about this before in Big Brother, which was more about obesity. In this book, I scrupulously avoided anything to do with food, because I've already done that. But, you know, it's the same obsession with appearance that makes people get disturbed about food and become consumed with becoming thinner. And now, of course, we've evolved a culture where being thin is not enough. You have to also have mean little muscles all over your body. Mm-hmm. And between the two of them, you know, it's unrealistic. It means spending all your time and energy, especially if you have a job, all your free time and energy, on something that is of limited value. I mean, I don't want to pretend that I'm anti-exercise. I think that would be hypocritical of me. But it's mechanical. You know, it makes it's easier to sleep, and you can have a little more energy if you don't overdo it. It's definitely good for your health, but it's really boring to talk about. And you know what it's like to talk to these people, especially the latest converts who've never got into it before. They won't shut up about their going running. And I can't tell you how boring it is to talk about running. it is the dullest subject on earth. And people will still manage to talk about it. Or cycling, you know. I'll go out to the park sometimes and listen in on what other cyclists or runners are talking about. You know, half the time they're talking about cycling or running. I don't know how they fill the minutes. It's mysterious to me. These are not interesting subjects. The world is full of interesting subjects, and it's just not these.
I mean, to your point, yes, exercise should be like something that's kind of just part of all of our lives. You know, we don't talk about every meal that we eat. You know, we don't talk about every shower that we take. But for some reason, you're absolutely right. As soon as somebody becomes an exercise fanatic, it turns into the most important thing in their life. No matter what their profession is, what they're good at, what they've studied, they want to talk about burning calories. It's insane, but you're absolutely right.
Well, it is a neurosis of our times, and I think, you know, it's been building for quite a while now. I think this fitness absorption, well, it goes way back, but it seemed to rev up, especially about 20 years ago. And then in the last 10 years, it's really out of control. It was abundantly on display during lockdowns because people would go outside in masses. I mean, both the parks in New York and London absolutely jammed. And with people displaying themselves, you know. Don't tell me you couldn't do those sit-ups in your living room. But no, you have to go out on the lawn. And so it's just this massive showing off. And the book makes this point. For younger people, this is mostly about status. And then for older people, it's mostly about not getting sick and not dying, and also about status, right? So, but one of the things that's interesting to me about this subject is that while identity politics may put the generations at odds, this is an absorption that the generations have in common, right? Baby boomers are just as obsessed with exercise as younger people are. They just have slightly different motivations.
Madeline.
I think you have going back to what you said about it being mechanical, I think that's one of the things that you explore in the book that's really interesting, this contrast between the physical and the mental. And I think it's something that our Instagram influencer class doesn't really see the tension between. You have, like you said, the main character is really focused on, this is mechanical, this is physical. For her, it's a physical issue, right? Because her knees are completely gone, so fitness is over for her. And then her husband has this really young, sexy trainer who, for her, it's all 100% mental, right? And their little fitness cult has convinced themselves of that. Like everything is 100% in your head and it's not physical at all. And I just find that we're not really having that conversation, where maybe the Instagram class is more of the mental too, right? Because they're all about self-love and the body positivity, right? And like, this is all in your head, and you don't see someone who's out of shape, like, because they're happy with their body. So I just think that that contrast is really interesting. And I wonder how you kind of see that as like another problem for people aging, and like overcoming this problem of aging. Like, is it mental? Is it physical? Yeah, I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one of the things that happens when you get older is that you have to start making a distinction between your physical self and your self, or you're in big trouble, because you're in this object that is falling apart. It is in the process of dying, and you can't take these deteriorations too much to heart. You need to insert this little bit of distance between you and the mortal coil you shuffle around in. Or it's just going to torture you all day. And you know, there are plenty of people whom it tortures all day. And that's all they care about and I just think that's a waste of what life is left. You know, when you're getting older, you have to take what you can get. And one of the things that the book points out on the physical mental divide is that it used to be that jocks, as they were called in my day, were considered complete airheads. You know, they were idiots, and they got bad grades, or they only got good grades to be kept on the football team. And nowadays, it's more, forcing yourself to beat your personal best is all terribly intellectual, and it's mind over matter. And now that the upper classes have discovered physical exertion, it's now become much more cognitive, and I just think that's hilarious.
It is hilarious. It's like, it's suddenly virtuous. It's occurring to me as we're having this conversation that a question that has haunted me for years, you are probably the best person that I could pose it to, is when you think about your body of work, everything that you write is independent minded. And you mentioned earlier that that sort of used to be the natural personality type of an artist, and the natural impulse of an artist would be, you know, to be an independent thinker, to be a creative thinker, not to be conformist, and to challenge, in fact, conformity. And it's sort of stunning to see that erode in younger generations. And my question is, when we talk about the transcript you included in this book between the supervisor and Remington, the male half of this marriage, what's fascinating to me is that there has not been a compelling, creative critique like that to come from the millennial generation. And I'm fascinated as to why that is. And, you know, honestly, there hasn't even really been a creative, compelling defense of that ideology to emanate from the millennial generation. And I wonder if you think there will be a great millennial novelist, a great Gen Z novelist, or, you know, multiple great millennial Gen Z novelists. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's correct, that these critiques aren't coming from the younger?
I have to agree with you. I have not read any novels from younger writers that take the mickey out of identity politics, or even take on this material appreciably at all. And I have to say that I would throw in older writers as equally guilty, because I think the political uniformity in literature right now is suspicious. It's like, yes, exactly as you said, what drew these people to this profession in the first place? Why are you all singing from the same hymn sheet? You know, why are you all the same? Why are you such bloody conformists? And why aren't you braver? I mean, just in the interests of providing something a little different to your readership, why don't you break the mold a little bit? But I see very little exploration of other political points of view. And I think one of the reasons you haven't seen much in terms of millennials writing pro-identity politics books is they would be terrible. They would just be unbearable to read. Partly because it's such an incredibly humorless movement. And so touchy that you can't say anything, and it's riddled with jargon. I mean, it's ripe for poking fun of, but it would be hard to write a book that successfully defended the ideology in a way that was even faintly readable.
Right, 100%. Or you can be like Nicole Hannah-Jones and just make up history, the 1619 Project, to make your ideological bent work.
Yeah, I would say she's a very fine fiction writer.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, on that point, there's an interesting lamentation in this book from your female protagonist about the devolution of discourse from books to podcasts. And since we're on a podcast right now, I wanted to ask if that lamentation reflected your own thinking.
I think there's just a passing line about the fact that
Yes.
nobody wrote anything down anymore, because nobody trusted you to read anything anymore. It's just you didn't get written instructions on anything. You have to, even if you don't even get written instructions with some, bicycle pump or something. You're saying you expected to go on YouTube and watch somebody teach you to do it orally. And yeah, I took a swipe at the fact that nobody read anything in print anymore, but just listened to it in podcasts. I actually have to admit that I recently got kind of obsessive about podcasts myself. So never let it be said that I didn't conform to something.
That's perfect. Ellie?
No, I mean, I guess I don't really have too much to add to that. I think one of the things that you touched on earlier that I really loved was the problem with identity politics being that it takes the achievement away from the individual when they know that, most of the reason they got a job was because of their sex or because of their race, their ethnicity, the place they were born, and not because of their talent or their ability or achievement. And I think that's one of it really hit home for me. I was writing about SNL a lot, and when they were getting criticized for not having a Black female cast member back in like 2014, they had an open call audition just for Black female comics to come audition for the role, and Sashir Zamita got it.
Don't you think that should be illegal?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's against the Discrimination Act. I mean, like, it sounds anti-constitutional. But she even said after she left the show, she's like, it wasn't a real audition. She's like, I was just there with a bunch of other comics, but it wasn't like I was the best one. I was just the best Black girl comic. I mean, just, and to me, that just takes away from so much, and it makes segregation so real and so much worse. I just think that seems obvious, but that's clearly against what the.
I'll tell you, I have personal experience of this in that the only major literary prize I've ever won was what was then called the Orange Prize, and it's only for women. Now, look, at that point in my career, I'd take what I could get, so I wasn't going to give it back. I needed the money, but it didn't mean the same thing to me as winning the Booker. I'd rather win the Booker. So that achievement is always a little colored orange, if you will.
Right.
Not a popular color in the United States these days.
Very popular, yeah. Much more popular than you would think, actually.
And so I know what it feels like to have that sense of achievement whittled away at.
Yeah.
It's
got an asterisk next to it. I mean, it just seems like, well, best of this select group. And that to me just, it just really takes away from it. But.
And, if you take a look at a lot of literary prize shortlists these days, their vast majority of the candidates tick some box. Now, I think that is damaging for the prize and also for the book buyer. Mm-hmm. Gets it right away. You look at that, you look at all the pictures, and you know exactly what the judges were thinking. And again, not necessarily fair to those authors, right? Maybe their books are fantastic, but because we have installed this, this affirmative action impulse, which is often unwritten, then it introduces doubt. And I don't think it helps anybody.
I think this actually really gets to the heart of the book, and I'll kick over to Madeline for the last question, but it's also, all of this is just flatly racist, and there's Remington actually and Serenata both sort of trying to wrap their heads around this, I think reflects, the normalization of outright racism that their generation watched this country defeat in so many ways. They're sort of left with their heads spinning trying to understand it, and I think that's probably really resonant. But Madeline, do you have something that you wanted to wrap the conversation up on?
Yes, I know I only have a couple minutes left with you, so I'm gonna actually change the subject a little bit. So I need your advice on something. I have not read The Mandibles, but my husband just read it about a month ago, and for our audience, one of the concepts or themes of the book is that the U.S. dollar is basically has no value and the economy has crashed and all this. And my husband is convinced that we need to be buying lots of firearms and guns, like as many as possible, because he's decided that is, should like your book come true, which some days it seems like it could, and should the dollar lose all its value, that guns are really the only thing that will hold any value. So should we do that? Like, is this like reasonable, or is this something that you foresaw happening?
Well, I'm not big on guns, and I don't own one. I don't especially want to own one. But in the process of writing the Mandibles, which is about the economic collapse of the United States in the very near future in 2029, apparently I got that wrong by a few years. It's too late.
You were pretty close.
There's a point in the book where one of the characters, who comes from a very anti-gun family, his mother is incredibly liberal and, Democrat, he gets a gun. He's he's the main character. He's 16 then. It's what they need. And it's in New York, things have fallen apart. They've been ejected from their house at gunpoint. And I didn't especially want, as an author, to reinforce this idea that when things fall apart, that's the main thing you need. But honestly, I knew my character was very savvy and precocious, and that's what they would need. So if you really do genuinely believe that civilization is on the cusp of collapse, then I don't think it's foolish to at least have a gun. I don't know about investing in an entire armory.
Right. We don't need an arsenal, but maybe a good insurance policy.
Yeah. I mean, I say that with reluctance, because obviously one thing that endangers Americans is other Americans with guns. So, there's an asterisk by that advice.
I'm going to squeeze in one more question. I'm so sorry, but you just raised the point. If civilization is on the cusp of collapse, do you think that civilization is on the cusp of collapsing?
Not yet, but I'm worried on two fronts. I'm worried about money, and I don't mean all of us earning enough. I mean, I'm worried about currency. I'm worried about the entire financial system collapsing, because this has never happened before in history, that countries all over the world have closed down all at once. And then at the same time, you've got all these countries running the printing press like crazy. And so that the amount of currency in the world is exploding. And I don't believe in modern monetary theory. I think this whole money tree thing is a fairy tale. And at a certain point, that Ponzi scheme is going to collapse. And, and it's going to hurt everybody. If you have any savings, they'll disappear. So I'm worried about that. And I'm also worried about the kind of division in this country that is going on in relation to race. It's even deeper than just race. The whole Trump era has made it worse. And we really have developed into, in some ways, two countries that hate each other. And I fear for the civic unity of the United States. It is supposed to be the United States, and it ain't right now. And it just seems to get worse. Now, if Biden is elected, is that going to make anything better? I'm not so sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sure I'm speaking for Ellie and Madeline when I say we could go on for another hour or two, but we so appreciate your time.
I really enjoyed talking to young people. Oh boy.
In our preferred medium, the podcast, where we don't have to actually use our brains and read. Well, thank you so much for your time, Lionel Shriver. Buy the book, Motion of the Body Through Space. Buy all of the books. They're all excellent, and they'll all make you a better thinker. So we would just really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, this has been another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky. I was joined today by my colleague Madeline Osburn and Ellie Bufkin of Townhall. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.